Oil rises, gasoline rises, inflation fears rise, and suddenly, the money in your pocket feels weaker. That sounds strange at first. Oil is just one commodity. It is something we burn in engines, refine into fuel, and pump into cars. So why does a jump in one commodity still have the power to shake stock markets, rattle central banks, and change what your money can buy? That is not a theoretical question right now. And that raises the real question of this video. Why does oil still control your money? This video is not really about oil prices alone. It is about something bigger. It is about how oil became one of the hidden forces inside the modern financial system. It is about why a shock in energy can become a shock in inflation. Why inflation can become a problem for interest rates. Why interest rates can reshape markets, borrowing and growth. And why, in the middle of all that, the dollar keeps showing up at the center of the story. By the end of this episode, you should understand three things. First, why oil became so important that it could move entire economies. Second, how the oil shocks of the 1970s helped change the way people think about inflation and monetary stability. And third, why even in a digital, financialized, algorithmic age, oil still has the power to change what your money is worth in the real world. Because oil is not just an energy story, it is a money story. To understand why oil matters so much, you have to stop thinking about it as fuel for cars. Oil became powerful because modern civilization is built on concentrated energy. Ships need it, trucks need it, planes need it, factories depend on it directly or indirectly. Fertilizer, plastics, chemicals, packaging, logistics, asphalt, industrial heat, and global trade all touch oil somewhere along the chain. Even when an economy looks digital on the surface, the physical world underneath it still has to be transported, manufactured, cooled, heated, wrapped, delivered, and moved. That is why oil is different from most commodities. If the price of one luxury good doubles, it hurts a niche market. If the price of oil jumps, the shock spreads. It leaks into transport, then distribution, then freight, then food, then consumer prices, then expectations. It becomes a cost pulse moving through the veins of the entire economy. And once a price shock starts moving through the real economy, it stops being just an energy problem. It becomes a pricing problem, then a wage problem, then a policy problem, then eventually a money problem. That is the first key to this whole story. Oil matters because energy is never really separate from the price system. It sits underneath the price system. The world learned that lesson the hard way in the 1970s. The oil shock was not just a commodity spike, it was a systems shock. Suddenly the modern world discovered how fragile its own infrastructure really was. Gas lines formed, shortages hit, inflation accelerated, confidence weakened, and governments realized that energy could destabilize not only industry and transport, but also politics, psychology, and monetary stability. What made it worse was timing. The broader inflation backdrop was already deteriorating. The late 1960s and early 1970s were already marked by fiscal imbalances, rising price pressures, and a weakening monetary framework. The oil shock did not create every problem, but it hit at exactly the moment the system was already becoming vulnerable. That is why the 1970s matter so much. They showed that inflation is not always a simple story of too much demand or too much money. Sometimes inflation comes from the real world hitting the monetary world. Sometimes it comes from an economy discovering that the inputs holding everything together are suddenly more expensive, scarcer, or politically unstable. And oil became the clearest example of that. Now the story gets more interesting. Oil did not just move prices, it also became tied to monetary power. Go back one step. After the end of the old gold-linked order, the dollar was no longer anchored to gold in the same way, and the world moved more fully into a system of paper currencies. That should have made the dollar weaker in principle. A currency with no gold anchor now depended even more on trust. But trust in a global currency does not come only from metal, it also comes from use. If the world keeps pricing and settling a huge share of trade in dollars, then the world keeps needing dollars. And energy trade helped reinforce that habit. Oil did not single-handedly create dollar dominance. But a world where energy was widely priced in dollars strengthened the dollar's role in reserves, trade, and finance. So oil was doing two things at once. It was helping shape inflation in the real economy, and it was helping reinforce the monetary architecture of global dollar power. That is the second big clue. Oil was never just a barrel, it was a strategic hinge between energy and money. Now jump back to the present. It is tempting to think oil should matter less now. The economy looks more service-based, more digital, more software-driven, less industrial, less physical. But that view misses something important. Even the digital economy lives inside a physical economy. Cloud servers need electricity. Goods ordered online still move through warehouses, trucks, ships, and delivery networks. Food still depends on transport, fertilizer, storage, and refrigeration. Construction still depends on fuel-intensive inputs. Airlines, freight systems, agriculture, chemicals, heavy industry, and emergency logistics still remain deeply exposed to energy costs. That is why oil spikes still matter. They may hit consumer inflation directly through gasoline and heating, but they also hit indirectly through shipping, production, food chains, and expectations. And this is where the money story becomes visible to everyone. When energy gets more expensive, the economy has to absorb the shock somehow. Businesses try to pass on costs. Consumers cut spending elsewhere. Markets reprice the path of inflation. Bond yields react. Expectations about rate cuts change. So when oil jumps, your money does not become weaker by magic. It becomes weaker because the cost structure of the economy changes. And once the cost structure changes, the pricing system changes with it. This is the part people often miss. Most discussions about money are too abstract. They focus only on central banks, interest rates, deficits, money printing, and financial markets. Those things matter, but they are not the whole story. Money lives inside a real economy, and the real economy runs on materials, labor, logistics, and energy. That means the value of money is never just a financial idea. It is also a physical one. If the energy required to move a modern economy becomes more expensive, then the economy becomes more expensive to operate. And if the economy becomes more expensive to operate, the purchasing power of money comes under pressure. Not because a central bank pushed a button, but because the physical cost of sustaining output has changed. This is why oil shocks are so revealing. They expose the limits of purely financial thinking. They remind us that monetary systems do not float above reality. They sit on top of reality. And reality has shipping lanes, refineries, pipelines, geopolitics, spare capacity, supply disruptions, and energy bottlenecks. So the deeper lesson is simple. Money is shaped not only by policy, it is also shaped by power, scarcity, and energy. And oil sits right at the intersection of all three. So why does oil still control your money? Because oil still helps set the real cost of modern life. It powers movement, it influences production, it affects expectations, it pressures central banks, it touches inflation directly and indirectly. And because it is tied to both physical necessity and global trade, it still reaches into the structure of money itself. That was true during the great oil shocks of the 1970s. It is true in a different form today. And it will stay true for as long as the world remains deeply dependent on energy-dense systems that run through fuel, transport, and global trade. And that leads to the next question. If oil can still shape money from the outside, then what gave money value from the inside in the first place? Before oil, before central banks, before the dollar became the world's dominant currency. Why does money have value at all? That is where we go next.